When my sister slammed the door in my face on her birthday, humiliated by the grease-stained hands that paid for everything she took for granted, I didn't argue. I just walked away. What happened next wasn't about revenge. It was about showing her what real life looks like when you can't hide behind someone else's hard work. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about family. It's about how we find our worth when the people we love no longer see it. My name is Elena Miller, and I'm 37. I own a small HVAC company in Maine, the kind of business most people only think about when the heat stops working in winter. My days are long and my hands are always stained with the smell of oil and dust. It's not glamorous work, but it's real. It's work that keeps people safe when the cold creeps in. 5 years ago, everything in my life shifted in a single night. My parents were killed in a car accident. Gone in an instant, leaving me standing alone in our family kitchen, the scent of lilies from the funeral still hanging in the air. My sister Lauren was 15 at the time, more girl than woman, with her whole life stretched out ahead of her. She looked at me with those wide, startled eyes, and in that moment, I promised I'd take care of her. I told myself I would be both sister and parent, that I would never let her feel the weight of the world pressing down on her the way it had pressed on me. Lauren was always the dreamer. Even as a child, she'd sit on the porch steps at dusk, her chin resting on her knees, telling me about all the places she'd go one day. Paris, Rome, the bright lights of New York City. She saw the world as something to conquer. I saw it as something to survive. While she was weaving stories in the air, I was learning how to fix the old furnace in the basement with Dad. I was the girl who liked the smell of metal and the scratch of grit under her fingernails. Dad used to say I had good hands. Hands that could mend what was broken and keep the heat flowing when the winter winds howled. Back then, it didn't matter that we were different. Our parents held us together like glue, balancing out her bright visions with my steady presence. But when they died, it was like the ground shifted beneath our feet. Suddenly, it was just me holding the roof up for the both of us. I threw myself into my work. There wasn't time for anything else. Lauren was still in high school, and I needed to make sure she had everything she needed to finish strong. My days were a rhythm of early mornings and late nights jobs that left my back aching and my fingers numb. I didn't mind. Every time I wiped sweat from my forehead, I thought of Lauren's future and how I was laying the path for her even if she didn't see it yet. When she got her acceptance letter to Ashmore College, she lit up like I'd handed her the world. I remember that moment so clearly. The envelope in her hand, the way she looked at me like she was already somewhere far beyond our little kitchen. I told her not to worry about the money. I'd find a way to cover it all. And I did. I worked every holiday, took on every emergency call, and lived in the same cramped apartment I'd had since my 20s. My furniture was secondhand, my shoes worn at the soles, but I didn't care. If Lauren could walk onto that campus without fear of tuition bills, it was all worth it. I thought that would be enough. I thought if I gave her everything she needed, she'd always know how much I loved her. But when she came home on breaks, I started to notice the difference in her eyes. The way her smile didn't quite reach the warmth it used to have, the careful way she spoke when she mentioned her new friends. Friends whose parents were doctors, lawyers, people with glossy lives that I could never touch. She never said it outright, but I saw it in the way she hesitated when someone asked about her family. She'd say, "My sister runs her own business with a practiced casualness that skipped over the sweat and dirt of what that actually meant." She never mentioned that the business was built on pipes and ductwork, and nights spent kneeling on cold floors. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that it was just a phase or that I was being too sensitive. But in the quiet moments I felt the truth settle in my bones. She was embarrassed by me. I saw it in the way she looked at my hands. The calluses that never softened, the faint black smudges of oil I could never fully scrub away. I saw it in the way she avoided talking about money, as though the fact that I was paying for her tuition and rent was a secret she wanted to hide. I didn't hate her for it. How could I? I knew what it was like to want to belong, to want to be seen as more than where you came from. Ashmore was a world away from our small town, and the clang of metal in my workshop. But it still hurt. Because every dollar I earned, every hour I worked was for her. I never asked for thanks. All I wanted was for her to see that I was still here, still steady and sure, even when she was chasing something shinier. So I kept going. I woke up early and worked late, patching up broken pipes and coaxing heat from old furnaces. My hands never stopped moving because that was how I showed my love in the labor, in the steadiness, in the unspoken promise that no matter how far she went, she'd always have a home with me. But as the years passed, and as I watched Lauren's laughter grow sharper and her eyes grow distant, I began to wonder if love was enough. Because love, I realized, can't live in just one heart. It needs to be seen. It needs to be honored. And I wasn't sure anymore if Lauren saw me at all. When Lauren was younger, she used to tell me everything. I'd be fixing dinner in our tiny kitchen, the air filled with the smell of onions sizzling in the pan, and she'd chatter away about her teachers, her friends, what she wanted to be when she grew up. She asked me about everything. What color she should paint her nails for the school dance, which poem to read for her English class, if the jeans she wanted were too expensive. I felt like her anchor in those moments, the safe harbor she came home to after sailing into the world. But as the months at Ashmore turned into years, her calls became less frequent. Instead of the excited rush of words about a new club or a funny story from class, I'd get carefully curated updates. "Things are good," she'd say, her voice light and breezy. "Classes are busy, you know how it is." She would mention the names of her new friends with the kind of reverence I didn't recognize. Cameron's dad was a judge. Lila's mom was a surgeon. Each name was a badge of belonging, a shield she wrapped around herself. She didn't talk much about me. When I asked about her classes, she answered in generalities as if she was reading from a script she didn't want me to see behind. She'd say, "I'm fine, just tired," or "everything's going well," and I'd try to catch the faint note of something real behind those words. But there was nothing. She was pulling away, and I didn't know how to bridge the distance. At first I tried not to see it. I told myself it was normal that she was busy, that college was supposed to be a whirlwind. But every time she slipped away, a small silent part of me kept asking where was the girl who used to curl up beside me on the couch, asking me to read her the stories she'd written in her spiral notebook. Where was the girl who used to beam with pride when she told her friends, "My sister can fix anything"? I still called her every Sunday evening, even if I knew she wouldn't always answer. When she did, she'd tell me about the parties she went to, the wine bars she discovered with her friends, how someone's father had invited them to a networking brunch in the city. Her laughter sounded different in those stories, more polished, more careful, like she was practicing for an audience. If I mentioned my work, she'd change the subject. Once I tried to tell her about a particularly tough job I'd had that week, how I'd spent 12 hours replacing a broken heat pump in a snowstorm, how the family who lived there had hugged me when it was done. I thought she'd smile, maybe even say, "That's amazing, Elena," but instead she just looked away from the screen, her eyes drifting to something out of frame. "Oh," she said lightly, "that's good. Anyway, I was telling you about the new restaurant Lila's boyfriend took us to." And just like that, the door closed. I didn't push. I didn't tell her how proud I was of that job, how it had made me feel like my work mattered, like I was doing something that kept people warm and safe. I swallowed it down, telling myself that it wasn't important compared to the new world she was building for herself. In my heart, I tried to hold on to the old belief that as long as Lauren was happy, it didn't matter if she didn't want to hear about furnaces and ductwork. My job was to make sure she never had to worry about the heat or the rent or the next semester's tuition. If she could shine in those rooms filled with laughter and champagne, I thought then I'd be content to stand in the shadows holding up the ceiling. But as time went on, I began to feel the cold edge of something I couldn't name. It wasn't anger. I loved her too much for that. It was more like a slow ache, the realization that no matter how many hours I worked or how many bills I paid, I would never be part of the picture she was painting. I was the smudge in the corner, the one she'd rather leave out. I remember one call especially. She was telling me about an internship fair, how she'd met someone whose father owned an art gallery in New York. Her face was lit up in the glow of her laptop screen, and I wanted to be happy for her, I really did. But in that same conversation, when I asked her if she needed anything, she paused just for a moment and said, "No, I'm fine. Everyone else's parents handle everything for them. I don't want to seem different. Different." The word felt heavy in the air between us. I didn't ask what she meant by that. I already knew. So I listened to her talk about the gallery, about the parties and the brunches, and I kept my stories about cracked pipes and emergency calls to myself. I told myself that was love, letting her build her world the way she wanted it, even if it meant leaving me outside of it. What I didn't see then was that in her mind, my place wasn't just outside the frame. It was something she was trying to paint over entirely. In her new life, there was no room for the woman with oil-stained hands and an apartment that smelled faintly of solder and soap. I didn't realize that to her, I had become a blemish she wanted to scrub clean. But in those days, I didn't let myself see it fully. I clung to the idea that love was enough, that if I just kept working, kept showing up, she'd see that everything I did was for her. I didn't know that sometimes love means stepping back and letting someone see the truth of what they're losing. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that every Sunday call was growing shorter. Every conversation was edged with a careful distance I couldn't cross. And still I kept calling, because that's what sisters do, even when the line between you starts to fray. Lauren had been talking about her 21st birthday for months. She planned every detail, the guest list, the signature cocktails, the perfect playlist. It was the kind of celebration that marked a turning point, a night when the past was meant to fall away and the future would shimmer under the soft glow of candlelight. I wanted to give her something that felt like home, something that would remind her of where she came from, even as she reached for more. So I baked the apple pie our mother used to make on special days. The smell of cinnamon and sugar filled my small kitchen, a scent that took me back to my childhood, to warm afternoons, and the gentle clink of dishes as Mom hummed over the stove. I hoped Lauren would taste that memory and feel the love behind it. I didn't have a fancy dress to wear. My clothes were practical and plain, the kind you could wear into a mechanical room or to a grocery store on a cold night. Still, I chose the nicest thing I owned, a soft navy blue wool dress that fit me well even if it was years old. I brushed my hair back and put on a pair of small silver earrings, hoping it would be enough to blend in. When I arrived at her apartment, I could hear laughter echoing in the hallway before I even knocked. The door swung open to a warm rush of music and golden light. Inside, the room was alive with the soft clink of glasses and the scent of expensive perfume. Her friends stood in small groups, their hair shining under the chandelier, their laughter ringing out like polished bells. I paused in the doorway, pie in hand, and for a moment I felt like I was standing outside some enchanted world, one that glittered and glowed in ways my own never had. Lauren appeared at the threshold, her smile bright, but her eyes flickering down to my dress before she pulled them back up to meet mine. "Hi, Elena," she said, her voice light and forced. "Come in." She reached for the pie with careful hands, her fingers brushing mine. Next time she added her tone gentle, but with a sharp edge. "You should wear something a little fancier, just so you don't feel out of place." I felt the words land in my chest, but I smiled and nodded. "Of course," I murmured. I stepped inside the warmth of the room, pressing around me. Her friends were talking about Paris and internships, places they'd been and places they would go. They had that easy confidence of people who had always known there would be a seat at the table for them. I tried to find a corner where I could just be present without taking up too much space. I watched Lauren flit around the room, her laughter easy and bright as she introduced people, her hand resting lightly on Nathan's arm. She was so sure of herself here, so graceful. And for a moment I felt proud. Proud that she had found her place, even if I wasn't sure there was room for me in it. The call came just as I was setting the pie on the counter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the number from work glowing bright on the screen. A major restaurant across town had a heating failure. The entire system down a room full of guests growing colder by the minute. My crew was already on site, but they needed me. I glanced at Lauren, her eyes shining in the low light. "I have to go," I said, my voice low. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Her smile faltered. She didn't argue, but I saw it. The flash of something in her eyes that wasn't disappointment so much as embarrassment, like I was a detail she'd rather leave out of the perfect picture she'd painted tonight. I slipped out quietly. The winter air bit at my cheeks as I drove across town, the roads slick with old snow, and the smell of salt and exhaust. At the restaurant, I pulled on my coveralls over the dress, my hair pulled back into a messy knot. My boots left wet prints across the tiled kitchen floor as I knelt beside the broken furnace, my hands working through the grime and the cold. The job took longer than I'd hoped. When it was done, my knuckles were scraped and blackened, and the faint smell of grease clung to my skin, no matter how many times I wiped them clean. My hair was damp with sweat, and the collar of my dress was smudged with a long black streak where I'd brushed it with a dirty glove. But I had promised her I'd be back, and so I was. I drove straight from the job to her apartment, too rushed to change out of my work clothes, too tired to feel the chill that clung to my damp sleeves. When I stepped back into the warm light of her apartment, it was like stepping onto another planet. The music had softened, the laughter had grown looser with the late hour, but the polished glow of it all still shone. I saw the way Lauren's eyes widened when she saw me in the doorway, the faint sheen of oil still on my cheek, the scent of diesel and cold air that clung to me. "Chi, you didn't change," she asked in a low voice, switching from English to the word she used only when she was flustered. Her voice trembled a mix of disbelief and something else I didn't want to name. "I came straight here," I said simply. "I wanted to make sure I didn't miss the rest of your night." She didn't meet my eyes. She glanced over her shoulder as if to see if anyone else had noticed me. They'll wonder," she said softly. "What they'll think." I didn't answer. I stood there, the cold still clinging to me, the scent of metal and winter following me into her bright, warm room. And I thought maybe they would wonder. Maybe they would judge. But I had done what I always did, showed up even if it meant coming with my hands stained and my clothes rumpled. For the first time, I wondered if Lauren understood that. Or if in her new world of silk and crystal she had stopped seeing me altogether. I came home from the party in a kind of haze. The cold night air had done nothing to wash away the scent of oil that clung to my skin, the sweat that had dried along my hairline. My hands were still rough and cracked, and I could feel the faint ache in my back from hours bent over that broken furnace. But more than that, there was an ache deeper inside a tight knot in my chest that pulsed with every memory of Lauren's face that night. I set my purse down on the worn kitchen table, the wood cool under my fingertips. The house was silent, the kind of silence that only comes in winter when the world outside is held in ice and the night feels endless. I didn't bother turning on the light. I just sat there in the dark, the only sound my own breathing and the distant hum of the heater I'd repaired myself last year. I wasn't angry at Lauren. I didn't feel rage or betrayal. What I felt was something simpler and maybe sadder clarity. She didn't understand what I had given up for her, but how could she? I had spent so long shielding her from the sharp edges of this world that she had no idea how they cut. She had never felt the cold of a January morning, when the heat doesn't work, never felt the panic of an unpaid bill or the weight of a landlord's warning. She had never seen the way sweat stings your eyes when you're crawling under a house in the middle of winter, or how your hands ache from turning a wrench in the dark. She didn't know any of that because I had never let her. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if I took on all the burden, she could be free. But sitting there in the quiet of my kitchen, I realized that all I had done was build her a cage of comfort, a cage that kept her soft and separate. She didn't see me as her sister, the one who held her up. She saw me as the stain on her perfect world, the part she wanted to keep hidden in the shadows. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the cracked plaster of the ceiling. My mother's words came back to me then, soft and certain as if she were sitting across from me in the dark. Love doesn't mean making someone weaker. Real love makes them strong. She used to say that when Lauren and I fought as kids, when she saw me stepping in to fix every mistake my little sister made, I never understood it then, but I did now. I stood up and walked to the small shelf where I kept the papers that mattered most. Insurance policies, tax forms, and one thin folder that held the information for Lauren's college fund. I pulled it down and sat back at the table, the weight of it in my hands, a reminder of every early morning I'd worked, every job I'd taken that left me too tired to speak at the end of the day. Every dollar in that account was a piece of me, scraped together from sweat and long hours from the quiet refusal to let our parents' deaths take everything from us. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen harsh in the darkness. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. My breath felt steady, my resolve clear. This wasn't an act of anger. It wasn't punishment. It was a choice. To stop shielding her, to stop pretending that love meant giving until there was nothing left of me. I logged into the tuition account, my password, a string of numbers that only I knew. The anniversary of our parents' wedding day, the date that once meant family and laughter and warm kitchens. The balance stared back at me, the sum of everything I had worked for. My heart ached as I thought of Lauren's face, of how she would feel when she realized what I had done. But I knew it was the right thing. She needed to stand on her own 2 feet to learn that comfort isn't owed, it's earned. I drafted the email to the bursar's office, slowly choosing each word with care. Effective immediately, I will no longer be responsible for Lauren Miller's tuition and living expenses. Please direct all future communications to her directly. Simple, final, no explanations, no blame, just the truth. I read it over once, then twice. My hand trembled just slightly as I clicked send, the quiet chime of the confirmation ringing out in the silence of my kitchen. I closed my laptop and set it aside, folding my hands in my lap. The weight that settled over me then wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was something closer to relief. For years, I had carried both of us, her dreams, her comfort, her freedom. Now for the first time, I was setting it down. I wasn't abandoning her. I wasn't cutting her off out of spite. I was giving her the chance to learn what it meant to stand in the world on her own terms, with her own strength. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, breathing in the quiet. The smell of oil still clung to me, a reminder of the work I did and the life I had built. It wasn't pretty or polished, but it was real, and it was mine. I hoped that one day Lauren would understand, that one day she would see that love isn't endless giving. It's teaching someone how to be whole without you. Then, in that cold kitchen under the soft hum of the heater I'd kept alive all these years, I felt the first flicker of peace. The call came the next morning. I was in the workshop cleaning out the back of my van and trying to ignore the sting of tired muscles. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a moment I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but I knew it would be her, and I knew I needed to hear her voice. When I answered, Lauren didn't waste any time. Her voice was raw, thick with panic. "Elena," she said, her words tumbling out so quickly they tangled together. "How could you do this? How could you just cut me off like that? I'm going to be kicked out. Don't you understand? I can't pay for school on my own." I closed my eyes, leaning back against the cold metal of the van. I could picture her, pacing back and forth in her dorm room, her hair a tangled mess from the night before, her face red and blotchy from tears. I wished for a brief moment that I could hold her and smooth her hair the way I used to when she was small. But I didn't let that wish guide my words. "Lauren," I said quietly, "I'm not cutting you off because I don't care. I'm not leaving you. But I can't keep carrying all of this for you. It's not helping you, and it's not fair to either of us." She made a sound like a wounded animal, a sharp intake of breath that cracked something in me. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "This isn't just about money. This is my life, my future. You can't just. You can't just decide it doesn't matter anymore. I swallowed hard. I know it matters, I said. But you're strong enough to figure this out, Lauren. You're not a child anymore. I've given you everything I could, and I'd do it all again if I thought it would help you stand taller, but I see now that it's only made you lean harder. And I can't be your crutch anymore. She sobbed then, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. I let the silence stretch out because I knew there was nothing I could say to make it easier. Some lessons you can only learn when you're forced to face them alone. Please, she finally whispered. I'm not ready for this. I don't know how to be on my own. I closed my eyes and let the tears come. They were hot and silent, slipping down my cheeks in the cold of the workshop. I know, I said softly, but you will learn. I promise you that. For a moment I could almost feel her there with me. Not the polished young woman who lived in a world of parties and internships, but the little girl who used to curl up in my bed when the thunder scared her, who trusted me to chase away the monsters. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. I wanted to promise her that I would always be there to catch her if she fell. But that would be another lie, and I was done with lies. When we hung up, I sat there for a long time, the phone still clutched in my hand. The air smelled of metal and motor oil, grounding me in the reality I had built with my own 2 hands. My chest ached, but I didn't feel regret. What I felt was something closer to release. The sense that for the first time in years, I was letting both of us breathe. Later that day at the office, one of my co-workers, Miguel, stopped me in the hallway. He was a kind man, a gentle presence in the often harsh world of our trade. Elena, he said, his brow creased with concern. You look, I don't know, worn down. I forced a smile, wiping at my cheeks. I probably do. I admitted, it's been a long time coming. Miguel hesitated, then rested a hand on my shoulder. You know, he said, his voice low, you don't have to carry everything alone. It's okay to let someone else help sometimes. I nodded, though I wasn't sure he understood, because it wasn't just about the weight of Lauren's tuition or the bills that stacked up like winter snow. It was about the years I had spent holding her world together with calloused hands and late nights about the quiet desperation that had kept me moving long after I should have stopped. I smiled a little more genuinely, then the kind of smile that felt like it was coming from somewhere deep inside me. I'm learning, I said. I'm learning how to love her without losing myself. And I'm learning how to love myself enough to let go. He didn't say anything else. He just squeezed my shoulder and walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway with the hum of the heaters in the background. The same heaters I spent my days keeping alive, the same warmth I had given to strangers and family alike. That night when I went home, I let myself cry again. But this time the tears didn't feel like failure. They felt like a kind of freedom, a washing clean of years of silent sacrifice. I was still afraid of what would happen to Lauren, afraid of how she would see me when the dust settled. But under that fear was a calm certainty. I wasn't abandoning her. I was setting her free. And maybe, just maybe, I was setting myself free too. 2 months passed in a slow, uncertain rhythm. The days blurred together. Long hours of work, quiet dinners in my small kitchen, and nights spent wondering if I'd made the right choice. I told myself over and over that it was what needed to be done, but doubt has a way of creeping in when the world around you grows too still. I didn't hear much from Lauren. At first there were tearful voicemails and hurried texts. Please, Elena, I can't do this alone. I listened to them in the dark, my chest tight with an ache that felt bigger than my small apartment. But I didn't respond. I wanted to. Every instinct in me screamed to fix it, to rush in and make it right. But I stayed quiet, because I knew this was something she had to figure out for herself. And then, slowly, the calls stopped. The silence stretched out day by day until I began to wonder if she would ever reach out again. Part of me was afraid that I'd lost her for good. But underneath that fear was a small, persistent hope that maybe she was learning something new in the quiet. On a Monday morning in late March, I was in the office early, sorting through invoices and work orders, the air smelling faintly of coffee and machine oil. The door opened behind me, and I looked up expecting to see one of my technicians or a supplier dropping off parts. Instead, there was Lauren. She stood in the doorway, clutching the strap of an old canvas bag that had seen better days. Gone were the carefully chosen outfits and the hint of perfume that always followed her. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and her face was bare of makeup, pale and serious. She looked real, and so young. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I felt my heart lurch in my chest, a mix of relief and sadness. I had imagined this moment 100 times. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to say. "Hi," she said finally, her voice small. I'm sorry for just showing up like this." "It's all right," I said softly. "Come in." She stepped inside the door, clicking shut behind her. She looked around the office, taking in the cracked linoleum floors, the shelves lined with spare parts and tools, the battered desk that had been mine since I first started this business. It was a far cry from the polished apartments and sleek lecture halls she'd grown used to. "I've been working at the library," she said quietly. "It doesn't pay much, but it's something. I've also applied for some scholarships." I'm not here to ask for money," she added quickly, her hands twisting around the strap of her bag. "I know I don't have the right to ask for that anymore." I felt something in me loosen at those words. Not because I wanted to see her struggle, but because she had finally stopped pretending she was owed anything. "What are you here for, Lauren?" I asked gently. She took a deep breath. "I want to understand. I want to learn how to take care of things, of myself. I've spent so long acting like I was too good to get my hands dirty, but that's not who I want to be anymore." Her voice wavered and she blinked back tears. "I don't want you to do everything for me. I want you to teach me how to do it myself." For a long moment, I couldn't find the words. My chest felt tight with something like pride, something like grief, because this was the first time I'd ever heard her say she wanted to stand on her own, not just because she had no other choice, but because she finally saw the value in it. I stood up and walked around the desk, stopping in front of her. I could see the faint smudges under her eyes, the uncertainty that lived in her shoulders, but I also saw the determination there. The spark I'd always known was inside her. "You're not weak, Lauren," I said quietly. "You never were. You just needed to see that for yourself." She looked down, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know I was wrong," she whispered. "I treated you like you were something to be ashamed of, and I hate that. I hate that it took losing everything for me to see how much you've given up for me." I reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder, my thumb brushing the worn fabric of her coat. "I'm not ashamed of what I do," I said. "And you don't need to be either. This work, it's honest. It matters. And if you want to learn, I'll teach you. I've been waiting for this day for a long time." Her shoulders shook with a quiet sob, but she nodded. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Not for the money or for what you did before, but thank you for not giving up on me." I pulled her into a hug, then feeling her trembling in my arms. The scent of oil and metal clung to my clothes, but for the first time she didn't flinch from it. She just held on her face pressed against my shoulder. For a long time we stood there in the quiet office, the hum of the heater filling the space around us. And in that moment I knew that this was the beginning of something new. For both of us. She had come to me not as a girl who needed saving, but as a young woman who wanted to learn how to save herself. And I would be there to guide her, not as the one who carried all the weight, but as her sister, someone who loved her enough to let her grow. The first few days that Lauren came to work with me felt strange, like stepping into a new rhythm we hadn't learned yet. She was quiet at first, her eyes watchful as she settled behind the worn reception desk. I could tell she was nervous, but there was a steady determination there too. A flicker of something that told me she was ready to earn her place. I showed her how to answer the phones, how to speak to customers in that calm, reassuring tone that had become second nature to me over the years. She took notes in a small notebook she carried everywhere, her brow furrowed in concentration. I watched her hands fumble at first, then grow more confident as the days went by. Each time she picked up the phone, I could see the small, proud smile that flickered at the edge of her mouth. She was learning. Not just the words, but the way to hold herself, the quiet strength in treating every call as if it mattered. Because it did. Every appointment meant a family that would be warm that night, a child who wouldn't shiver through another snowstorm, an elderly couple who could breathe easy in the comfort of their home. And slowly, I could see her start to understand that. There was something humbling in watching her find her footing here in the world I had built from the ground up. Gone were the polished edges of the girl who had once turned away from the grime of my work. In their place was a young woman who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, even if for now it was only paperwork she was sorting through. She asked questions about the business, about the repairs, about how I had learned to keep going, even when the work was hard and the days were long. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me when I came in from the field, my boots scuffed and my knuckles raw, and there was no trace of that old embarrassment in her eyes. Just curiosity, just respect. I was learning too. Having her here forced me to slow down, to let her find her own way instead of always stepping in to smooth the path. And for the first time in years, I let myself say no when someone asked for more than I had to give. I stopped taking on every emergency call that came my way, stopped working weekends just because I was afraid to let someone down. Not because I didn't care, but because I was starting to see that my worth wasn't measured by how much I could carry for other people. Lauren noticed that too. One afternoon, she watched me turn down a last-minute job that would have meant missing dinner with her and our oldest friend, Carmen. "You always said yes," before she said softly as we locked up the office. "What changed?" I smiled at her, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on my face. I realized that I'm allowed to have limits, I said. That saying no doesn't make me less. It just makes me human. She nodded, and in that small gesture I saw how far she had come, how far we both had. It wasn't always easy. There were days when she looked tired, her eyes shadowed with the weight of what she was learning. Days when she stumbled, when she forgot to confirm an appointment or misplaced an invoice. But each time she owned it. She didn't make excuses, didn't hide behind that bright, brittle smile she used to wear. She just took a breath, squared her shoulders, and tried again. One day, after a long morning of juggling calls and emails, she looked up at me from her desk. Her eyes were bright, but there was no trace of that old fear in them. "Chi," she said. That word she hadn't used in years, soft and warm in the air between us. I used to think that only the polished things mattered. That the people with perfect lives and clean hands were the only ones worth looking up to. She paused, her fingers twisting in her lap. But I was wrong. I leaned against the doorframe watching her. I didn't speak, didn't rush her. I let her find the words. "I see it now," she said, her voice steady. "The work you do, the way you keep showing up no matter how hard it gets, no matter how messy it is, that's what matters. That's what I want to be like." She swallowed, her cheeks flushing with quiet emotion. "You're not just my sister. You're the bravest person I know." For a moment, all the noise of the shop seemed to fade away. I felt her words settle over me like a balm, washing away years of doubt and shame. My eyes burned, and I blinked hard, willing back the tears. "I'm proud of you," I said softly. "Not because you're working here, but because you're willing to learn, willing to see the truth in what we do." She smiled then, not the careful, practiced smile of before, but something genuine and bright. "I'm proud of you too," she said, "of everything you've built, of how you never let anyone make you feel small. It wasn't a grand gesture. There were no fireworks or sweeping music in that moment. Just the two of us standing in the quiet of the office, surrounded by the smell of oil and old wood. But it was enough. In that moment, I knew that whatever came next, whatever storms we had yet to weather, we would face them as sisters, with our hands dirty, our hearts open, and the quiet, fierce pride of people who had learned to see the worth in the mess. A year later, on a crisp spring morning that felt like it carried the weight of all the seasons that had come before, Lauren called me and asked if I'd come over. There was something shy in her voice, but also a warmth I hadn't heard in a long time. I thought she said, almost hesitating, maybe we could make the apple pie, the way Mom used to. I stood there in my kitchen phone pressed to my ear and let the memory of that sweet, spiced smell wash over me. My mother's recipe, passed down in smudged handwriting on an index card, had always been a small piece of home we carried with us. I hadn't baked it in years. Somehow it felt like a promise we were both ready to make again. Of course I said, "I'll bring the cinnamon." When I arrived at Lauren's apartment, it felt different from the way it used to. The candles and designer furniture were still there, but she met me at the door in an old sweater flower already dusting the cuffs. Her hair was pulled back, and her smile was easy, unguarded. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I thought maybe this time we could make it together." In the kitchen, the small window let in slanted light, warming the old tiles. I pulled out the apples, crisp and tart, and we started peeling and slicing. It felt like a dance. The way she moved around me, the way I let her find her own rhythm. There was no rush, no careful politeness, just two women working side by side, letting the past settle around us like a comfortable blanket. As we worked, we talked. Not about money or classes or who had what title. Just about small things. The way the air smelled like rain, the neighbor's dog that always barked too loud. We laughed at the flour that dusted our hair and the way Lauren accidentally sliced an apple too thin. At one point she paused, setting down the knife. "Elena," she said softly, her eyes serious. "I used to think that love was about being taken care of. That if someone loved you, they'd make sure you never had to feel cold or hungry or alone." I looked at her, waiting. "But I was wrong," she continued. "Love isn't about having someone else carry your weight forever. It's about knowing that even when you fall, you can stand up again. That even when you fail, there's still a place for you in someone's heart. But you have to earn that place by being willing to fight for yourself, too." I set down the rolling pin and reached out my flour-dusted hand resting over hers. "And I learned something, too," I said quietly. "I thought love meant giving everything until there was nothing left. That being a good sister meant never saying no, never taking a breath for myself. But that isn't love either. Love is knowing when to stop, so that both of us can keep growing." She nodded, a small, steady smile blooming on her face. "I know that now," she said. "I know it because you taught me, not with words, but with everything you did for me, even when I didn't see it." We finished the pie and slid it into the oven, the kitchen filling with that warm, sweet scent that felt like coming home. We didn't speak much after that, just worked quietly side by side as the timer ticked down. It wasn't the easy closeness we'd had as children, but something deeper, something built on respect and understanding. When the pie was done, we sat at the small table by the window, forks in hand. The first bite was perfect. Sweet and tart, a little messy, just like it always used to be. Lauren took a breath, her eyes shining. "It's funny," she said, "how something so simple can feel like starting over." I looked around her apartment. The mismatched chairs, the worn rug, the small vase of flowers on the windowsill. It wasn't perfect. Neither were we. But in that moment, it felt like enough. I reached across the table and took her hand. "This isn't about going back," I said. "It's about moving forward, about knowing that even though we're not the same people we used to be, we still have a place in each other's lives." She squeezed my hand, her smile turning wry. "So, no more running away from the mess," I laughed. "No more. The mess is part of it, part of us. And in that small kitchen with the smell of cinnamon and apples hanging in the air, I realized that we were building something new. Not a perfect family, but a real one. One that understood that love has limits, but kindness never does. One that knew that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone learn to stand on their own and still be there when they find their footing again. We weren't just sisters anymore. We were two women, both of us changed, both of us stronger for the journey we'd taken. And as we shared that pie, I knew that the years ahead would hold challenges, but also the quiet, steady certainty that we'd face them together. Because love doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be endless. Sometimes it's as simple as a pie shared in a warm kitchen, two hands reaching across the table, and the promise that no matter how far you go, there's always a way back home. Thank you for listening to Elena and Lauren's Journey, a story about boundaries, growth, and the quiet strength we find in the messiness of family. Have you ever faced a moment where loving someone meant letting them learn to stand on their own? Or had to draw a line, not because you didn't care, but because you did? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can share and learn from one another. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, so you never miss another heartfelt story like this one. Your support helps these voices find their way to those who need them most. See you in the next chapter.